Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alastair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's Oscar Films Featuring Islands special, we will be men not talking to each other in the Banshees of Inisherin, and then enduring the whims of the mega-wealthy on an ill-fated cruise in Triangle of Sadness. But before that, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
So we are talking to each other now then?
Yes, we are right now.
It's really not going to be great for the whole format we've got here if we're men not talking to each other.
No, very much against the basic premise of a podcast.
There's really nothing else much to this. If you take away the men talking to each other, then this whole enterprise collapses very quickly.
Just be silent.
Please tweet us if you think that would be preferable. Anyway, yeah, what have I been doing other than watching those two films? I have been watching the final series of the BBC's adaptation of His Dark Materials, the classic children's novel series, trilogy by Philip Pullman. This is, of course, the tale of Lyra and her investigation into dust, which leads into a string of strange occurrences up to this final volume where she ends up involved in her father's war against God himself, as you do. So yeah, I've seen all three series of this now. I think I've commented on them all at least briefly on the podcast as we've gone. And my problem with this adaptation throughout is always that it's been very slightly plodding. Like they seem kind of determined to pivot towards self-serious premium telly fantasy rather than just making a rollicking children's adventure. And I'm not sure making a move towards the sort of quite self-serious side of the story is really to its benefit. I feel like I'd always rather it was a bit quicker and a bit more dynamic. Like each of these series is, I think the first and third one were 8 episodes and the second one was only 7 due to COVID problems. And honestly, I kind of rather they'd gone for the 6, the standard BBC 6. I feel like that might have almost been a bit more dynamic. It's fine, but you're very aware that it's still going. You do find yourself thinking a bit, okay, how many episodes are left? But yeah, having said that, it does do the massive epic ending pretty well when it finally gets there. They've clearly saved a lot of budget for the big showdown. And Ruth Wilson and James McAvoy are in this, leading the adult cast, with Daphne Keane as Lyra. And Wilson and McAvoy are both extremely good actors, especially Ruth Wilson. Very much gets a lot to do with the sort of morally ambiguous nature of Mrs. Coulter, the part she's playing. And the story as a whole is, I think, well served. You know, if you're a fan who maybe didn't like that Daniel Craig film from at this point decades ago, there were probably people listening to this who weren't alive when the Daniel Craig film came out, then yeah, this is probably, if nothing else, a faithful adaptation that takes it seriously. Part of me just kind of wishes they'd maybe take it a bit less seriously.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many 17-year-old listeners we have, but it does sound like this is a big improvement on the Daniel Craig one, definitely. I mean, I enjoyed the first 2 series a lot. I especially enjoyed the second series of the show, maybe because the second book is my favourite of the books, and the second book is quite tight and has a lot of good sort of tense scenes in it, which translated quite well to the sort of short series format. The third book is long. It's longer than the first and second one put together, so if anything it's too long. So probably paring it back from what it was to fit into 6 or 8 episodes sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I haven't read the books recently enough to comment in detail on them or the differences between them and the show, but I do vaguely remember the third one being a slightly disappointing, overlong, slightly indulgent ending. And this, yeah, again, it's maybe a little bit slow and ponderous, but it's not too bad. It's fairly straightforward with its 2 or 3 plot lines. It winds it to an ending. As I say, the emotional climaxes are quite well served, and if nothing else, the fact that it's so long and so spread out gives it a lot of space. I think, as you say, the second series was probably the best. That was when they seemed to get the most to have a handle on it as a sort of adventure story, rather than getting quite as carried away in all the exposition about God and the authority and the magisterium. And I do remember the first series especially being far too dominated by long sequences involving priests muttering to each other.
Yeah, they sort of moved quite quickly through that in the second season. I don't know if it was the fact that they felt that they'd established everything they need to establish and then kind of just went with it, or I got the feeling they maybe got some notes to make it more exciting in the second season, because although the first season I don't think quite captured the sense of adventure that the books have, they did have a really, really good roller coaster adventure. That's why they're such good page turners and why they appeal to people from sort of pre-teens through to adults. You know, they are just well written as well as being an imaginative universe.
It's a very interesting universe. The books, I think, are somewhat well known for getting a bit derailed by Philip Pullman's theological concerns by the end, but it's an endearing universe. I read the first of the sequel prequel weird trilogy he did, and That was quite fun as well. I still need to read the second one. Was it the second one? The Secret Commonwealth. I haven't read that.
Yeah, that's the second one. That one's set after the events of His Dark Materials and features like adult Lyra. That's very much a book aimed at grown-ups, I suppose. There's stuff in there that I wouldn't really consider, I don't know, necessarily to be aimed at children or even teenagers. There's some quite grim and dark bits in that book.
I mean, to be honest, it's taken them so long to finish the TV version due to, well, just the nature of TV and COVID, that Daphne Keane, the lead actor, is probably old enough to play adult Lyra pretty soon.
Yeah, if they want to pick it up with the Secret Commonwealth.
I haven't got the age handy, but she looks like she's coming up on 18 or 19, which is, I think, a bit older than Lyra's meant to be, but that's just one of these things you have to quietly ignore when you're watching multi-year shows about kids.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that they always cast older people who are more mature and probably just easier to manage on set. I mean, there's been so many teen dramas for people who look like they're on the far side of 30.
And in some cases actually are.
Yeah, in some cases actually are. I mean, the in-betweeners don't exactly look like they were 17 or whatever old they're supposed to be. But it's all part of the illusion of television. But I'm glad this holds up consistently. I mean, I did really enjoy, as you say, James McAvoy and Ruth Wilson playing the adult roles. I thought they're very well cast and they're both excellent performers.
Series 2, James McAvoy was only in one scene, which I think again might be a COVID thing. I'm not really sure. So I did wonder if that meant they couldn't book him or they couldn't afford him or something. But to be fair, he is fully back in this series. He's in almost every episode except for one or two, doing quite a lot of stuff. So yeah, if your main concern for watching the last series was a possible lack of McAvoy, then rest assured he's back. The Mac is back.
I believe the second series had an odd number of episodes, which is quite unusual, which is like either 7 or 9 or something like that.
It's 7. I think that might have been a COVID thing. There may have been another episode they failed to get to film.
Well, I believe there was going to be an episode with starring James McAvoy filling in the Azrael plotline from The Subtle Knife, which is a good plotline. I don't know if that was supposed to be one episode's worth of material dispersed between the others, or if it would just all be done in a sort of one tangent. I mean, it's kind of one section of the book that's just sort of put in there as this is what Azrael was up to. But they had to ditch that due to COVID. See anything, it just makes the show, the second series, more focused on Lyra and Will and more focused on the main plotline.
Yeah, the second series was good. The third series is alright as well. It just never quite transported me gloriously to another world. I don't know. It's possible my expectations were just too high.
Well, yeah, I definitely have high expectations because I love the book so much, and I think I read it at the right point when I was sort of 19, something like that, to really get lost in it. But yeah, I do want to finish the series, and I'm glad that the ending comes recommended.
Yeah, the ending especially, the last couple of episodes where they do the big payoff, that is very good. They do go all into that. Very impressive. Okay, so that's me. Alastair, what else have you been doing?
Well, from one show about people in the early 20s playing teenagers to another, I've been watching Wednesday on Netflix, which, for those who don't know, it's the show following Wednesday Addams' character from the Addams family as she goes off to a boarding school for outcasts, they're called. So yeah, vampires, werewolves, shapeshifters, sirens, that sort of thing. And obviously she gets caught up in a murder plot line. There's
obviously.
Yeah, there's a monster stalking the halls. Yeah, there's difficult relations between the cast and the normies of the town. And also, her general dour, cynical outlook clashes with the other people she meets at the school, specifically her roommate, Enid, incredibly bright and bubbly werewolf. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. The style is just really spot on. I think they just put everything into production design, costume design, sorting the right locations, set design to really, I don't know, just make it sing kind of like goth fairy tale vibe. It really looks beautiful. The script editor who's gone through every single line of Wednesday's dialogue to tweak everything to just sound as grim and morbid as possible did a great job. It's kind of got the right mix of lighter moments in a sort of black comedy and also a good engaging storyline. So yeah, overall this was very much enjoyable, even though it might have inadvertently killed 1899. I still enjoyed it.
I didn't see this. It was probably among the big omissions for my 2022 viewing, as I know this was a big deal in the closing months of 2022, and I stubbornly didn't get around to watching it because I was too busy slamming through old episodes of The West Wing. So yeah, lived up to the hype then. Good show, great show, masterpiece.
I'd say, lived up to the hype. Good show. I don't think it would have troubled the top 5 or probably even my top 10 shows of 2022. So it's not like I feel that the list we did in our end-of-year wrap-up episode was incomplete without this. But yeah, I certainly enjoyed it. What actually I think I would have really enjoyed is probably, it'd be a good one to watch over Christmas. Because yeah, it zips along. each episode has a sort of cliffhanger ending. It's probably some good Christmas telly. And yeah, they've got a great cast, I must say. I do like Christina Ricci, who obviously played Wednesday Addams when she was a teenager herself, is back. Catherine Zeta-Jones as Mortica. Gwendolyn Christie as the headmistress. And the young cast are really good as well, including Jenna Ortega, I think it's pronounced, as Wednesday, and Emma Myers as Enid. They make a pretty good double act, the dour one and the bubbly one.
Yeah, no, I have heard a lot of good things about it. I must admit, I think I probably skipped it initially because it sounded a bit too, I don't know, obvious, easy. But a lot of people seem to insist it's actually good. To be honest, it also sounds a lot like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, another show about a classic supernatural teenage girl character going to a magic school. I thought Sabrina was perhaps interesting but never quite fully worked, so maybe Netflix have just, got it right the second time. Maybe Sabrina was the dry run for Wednesday.
It's a very similar vibe. A cast of British notables as well, and the sort of similar sort of gothic sort of dark aesthetic that they've got running through it. Much as it feels uncomfortable for me to praise Tim Burton, I'm not actually a particular big fan of his films. There's some good ones. Sleepy Hollow, for example, is especially good, but I do think he's a bit overrated. But I think bringing him in to showrun this, I mean, he's done Addams Family films himself. In fact, I believe the one starring Christina Ricci. He gets the aesthetic and the style. I think the fact that this is pitched at teenagers kind of makes it work because it's kind of got there's a sort of silliness to it as well. Like, it's not supposed to be taken seriously as anything that's dark or grim. So there's the sense of silliness that runs through it sort of offsets the dourness of Wednesday as a character. And I think Tim Burton's managed to strike the right tone. And also, I mean, he is great at being in charge of aesthetics, production design, things like that. Again, bringing up the look is brilliant. So it's got its flaws. There's a few plot twists that are a bit convenient, and sometimes some of the teenage love triangle bits are somewhat predictable, things like that. So if we were doing a full review segment, I've got my criticisms, but as a recommendation I would say enjoyed this. Good for if you're looking for something a bit goth in your life.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the right level of teen goth. My partner's quite into this subgenre, so we may well make our way to this in the next few months. I think it'll be good to get some references. I hear there's an iconic dance sequence that my life will benefit from having seen.
That is very good. And they are doing a second season. Does have a big thing at the end when it says it's official, second season is coming. Obviously it's Netflix. Who knows when it'll turn up. Hopefully before Jenna Ortega and Emma Myers look like they're about 28, but I guess it's worth catching up before the second season comes.
Yeah, well, at least they haven't, prematurely cancelled it. I mean, to be fair, it was a massive smash hit. If they'd gone ahead and cancelled this, it would have really just hammered home their reputation as the abattoir of television.
Yeah, I mean, they cancelled all sorts of stuff. It is bizarre and confusing. And they cancelled Teenage Bounty Hunters, and now they've got a new show from the creators of Teenage Bounty Hunters, which seems to defeat the point that they could have just done more of that show, but I'm sure it'll be good.
We'll get there. I do miss Teenage Bounty Hunters.
Still stings, Netflix. Still stings.
Okay, and first up today, the first of our two Oscar Best Picture nominee films in this Alastair-friendly episode. It's The Banshees of Inisherin. This is, of course, the new movie about a pair of friends on the islands of Inisherin in 1923 who find themselves suddenly estranged after one of them, played by Brendan Gleeson, this is Colm, breaks off their long-standing friendship with seemingly no warning, leaving the other one, Porrig, played by Colin Farrell, just baffled about what the hell's happened here. And that's it, that really is the premise, that's the entire film. It's the new film from Martin McDonagh, who writes and directs this. His last one, of course, was 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which I believe also got a good write-up on this podcast. Alastair, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, this was a good film. I mean, I'm a fan of the director and the cast, so this was probably going to be an easy win for me. But I really thought this is quite a touching film about male friendship and the kind of complexities of adult male relationships. I think it's actually something that's relatively unexplored in a sort of accurate way in cinema. I mean, it's one of those weird things that obviously cinema is full of films, the history of especially Hollywood. There are so many films, about men and men, going on quests, missions relating to each other in various ways. But I often feel, and this is going to be a bit of a strange analogy, but like male friendship in cinema is a bit like sex in pornography. There's lots of it, but when you think about it, pornography is not like real sex at all. And most of the kind of very artificial plot-focused friendships you see on the cinema screen, especially between men, although there's lots of them in cinema, they don't feel like a real friendship or really how people relate. But this story of these, again, these two men, they've spent probably most of their lives together on this small island, but their relationship's broken down. It kind of really felt that, like, it reminded me of the way that people really do relate to each other. So I found it quite powerful on that level.
Well, yeah, a lot of male friendships in film tend to be this sort of, I don't know, either this completely superficial banter delivery system or this sort of overly sentimentalised brotherhood, which, is often just portrayed as being flawless and wonderful, and then occasionally with a few side remarks about how it's arguably basically a relationship. And, this is a very interesting, slightly very, very funny film about, the actual weird awkwardness and give and take and the sort of strange standoffishness of many actual male friendships, much like our own. Yeah, I love this film, to be honest. 1,000 points. Probably a lock for the top 5 list at the end of the year, if it counts, which I'm not sure if it does, because I'm pretty sure it came out in 2022 on all available measures. But if it had counted, it would probably have been in the list at the end of this year. It would have definitely been towards the top of last year's list. Yeah, I like this a lot. I thought the dialogue in particular was beautifully pitched. The sort of rambling back and forth of it. Almost every exchange in this film contains a laugh, except for the few that are, intended like properly emotionally. And even some of them have this sort of sad laugh in them. It's very good, and so the fact that the aching sadness of it somehow survives this level of comedy is also particularly impressive. I do remember Three Billboards doing a good job of that balance as well, and obviously the sort of comedy darkness balance is something that I very much enjoy. But yeah, I think this film does do a particularly good job of focusing on this quite narrow thing of these two characters mostly, and a couple of other people who are sort of dragged along in their wake, and really drilling into it in a way that works really well.
Yeah, I mean, the director has a lot of form for creating films that are both like tense and funny, balancing that difficult situation of, like, making your film funny and the jokes landing, but also having moments of seriousness that aren't detracted from by the levity. Absolutely, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri was my favourite film of 2017. And also other films he's done, like In Bruges and Seven Psychopaths. It is a similar sort of vibe. And this film is really, really funny in a sort of, there's quite a lot of dark humour to it, and it's just sort of like, there's a kind of understated humour in the way that almost everything anyone says is kind of a bit funny or a bit silly. I guess the sort of slightly eccentric people who inhabit this small island off the coast of Ireland, like even things like the local shopkeeper or the man who runs the pub always just seem to say something silly or get fixated on something minor that is just forms a funny moment before they return to the plot.
Yeah, it never quite feels like the characters are being laughed at either. It never quite feels like they're complete and utter mockable idiots or caricatures, despite the fact that a lot of them often say things that you do laugh at.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. As you said, that like there is not much plot to this, and it's mainly just a series of confrontations between the two main characters trying to overcome this irreconcilable difference. But it is always like electric each time they meet and each time something happens. You think you get tired of hearing Colin Farrell sounding slightly pathetic going, but why can't you be my mate? I'm not going to do the Irish accent.
Thanks.
but did briefly consider it and then dismiss that idea. Yeah, each time he comes around to it, but he finds a different way to make the scene exciting and interesting, and also to reveal something more about the characters. It's really gaining appreciation of who they are. The sort of like layers are pulled back through the subtlety of the dialogue.
Yeah, it's a story about one sort of good-natured but baffled, mopey Irish man wandering around the same few locations, talking to mostly the same 3, maybe 4 people. Yeah, it's impressive, but it's so compelling and so entertaining.
Yeah.
Plus comedy livestock, which I'll always go for.
Yes, there's some great donkey action in this one.
Great donkey action, bit of horse action, yeah. The animals are here. They're acting the shit out of it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's both heartbreakingly sad, but really funny when you just see Colin Farrell walking along with his donkey. To see this is what a man has been reduced to. Just the only company in this world is a donkey. And it's kind of hilarious, but also quite sad.
Oh yeah, there's this sort of ladder or this sort of hierarchy, isn't there? Because there's, Colin Farrell wants to be friends with Brendan Gleeson, but Brendan Gleeson is shunning him for his own reasons. And there's also the other character, Dominic, played by Barry Keoghan, who clearly sort of wants to be better friends with Colin Farrell, but Colin Farrell, I think, sees Dominic as a bit below him, and it's a sort of weird push and pull between them all. Yeah,
there's also a hierarchy of the people in the island, and Colin Farrell's Patrick's character has slipped down a few notches by being no longer friends with Colm, who's, I guess, more respected, partly because he's he's a musician and things like that and can make beautiful music. And then the Barry Keoghan character is very much the complete bottom of the pile. Because Patrick's a nice person, he still relates to him and wants to spend time with him. I thought Barry Keoghan was brilliant in this role. Really kind of, again, brought real humanity to a character that could just be a sort of comedy punching bag. He's probably the silliest of the core characters, but at the same time, he brings a real humanity to it, and you kind of get insight into the kind of quite tragic life he's led, even though it's only through a few scenes of dialogue.
Well, yeah, like he's not looked down on because he's ill or anything, or because he's just a bit quiet. He's looked down on because he's, actively annoying and does things like be creepy to Porrig's sister. But there's some relatability in there. There's some humanity to it, especially during his later scenes. You sort of learn to like him a little bit.
Yeah, very good performance. I mean, this film's just been absolutely showered with Oscar nominations, and I think everyone deserves it. Yeah, Colin Farrell nominated for Best Actor, both Brendan Gleeson and Barry Keoghan nominated for Best Supporting Actor. So yeah, I mean, they are all great, and I guess this film really works because of the subtleties of the performance and the kind of layers that the actors bring to the characters as well as the script.
Yeah, and Kerry Condon as his sister, who is one of the few people who's maybe has some self-awareness about how ridiculous this all is, but can't seem to do much about it.
Yeah.
She's great as well. Hopefully she too will get at least some level of award nods. She's very good in this.
She's good as well, and obviously, like, her desire to leave the island is part of the Patrick character's downward spiral as his life falls apart.
We've made it all sound very relatable so far. It does get towards some slightly odd plot twists in the latter half, yet it all somehow seems like it might work in a weird sort of folktale way.
Yeah, there's definitely an escalation into dramatic heights, I suppose. I don't want to say too much to spoil it, but yeah, I suppose I described it as like a series of confrontations between the core cast, especially Patrick and Colm, but there is an escalating tension and escalating drama to it that becomes, I guess, less realistic, but as the drama rises, the tension rises, which is what keeps you gripped to this film.
Well, yeah, you get very pulled into the sort of ebb and flow of it, like a lot of good, like, small town films or stories or shows or whatever. It sort of immerses you in this community, so you start to know what going here means to that character. Like, you're sitting there an hour in going, no, Porrig, don't go to that hut, Jesus Christ. Yeah, it was incredibly enjoyable, immersive couple of hours, this. I had a great time.
Yeah, there's a good sort of political side to it as well. It's set during the Irish Civil War, and various people have discussed online about how it's a metaphor for the Irish Civil War, the conflict that erupted after the Irish Revolution and the British were driven out, when various factions turned on each other. And obviously there's a relatively accessible metaphor of two people who were brothers in arms against the world. They've kind of lived together their whole life, have now turned on each other for slightly baffling and to a lot of people outside fairly pointless reasons, and this escalates into mayhem and violence. And there's a clear metaphor for Ireland's history there.
Yeah, it's sort of touched on. It's quite off to one side.
Yeah, it's very much at the level of subtext or a metaphor and things like that. That's the way you can understand it. But yeah, the film doesn't include anything directly political. The few times the Civil War is mentioned, people aren't really aware of what's going on or seem to particularly care or have a stake in one side or the other. So the politics is part of the background, but it's sort of weaved into the meanings that you get from the film, the way the characters relate to each other sort of stand in for broader strange in society, which is not something you have to appreciate. But I do like the fact that there's clearly a lot of thought has gone into this film on every level, including the political level.
Yeah, and there's also, a bit of a gentle hint about what's really going on and with Colm, but it's not really dug into at length because they didn't really have therapy speak in 1923. So you just have to notice what's happening.
Yeah, but we can intuit, I guess, as the audience from the outside. I mean, I'd be very happy if this wins lots of Oscars. There's been some good films so far. I mean, it's up against films such as Tar and Everything Everywhere All at Once. I mean, three films that are incredibly different from each other. So it's sort of hard to say, which one's the best. But if any of these films took it, I'd be happy with that.
Are those your top three contenders then?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I'm on the record for not liking Avatar: The Way of Water. I'll keep my powder dry on Triangle of Sadness for at least the next few minutes. Yeah, there are other films in the mix, but these are the ones that I've been enjoying.
Okay, well, I've seen 2 out of 3 of those, so I feel like I'm doing all right.
Yeah. All Quiet on the Western Front, very good as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and our last nomination in this category. It's Triangle of Sadness, a satirical film written and directed by Ruben Östlund. This is, of course, the story of a bunch of rich, successful and rich people on a boat where, as you may have guessed from the title, they're going to encounter difficulties. At first, merely the consequences of their own stupidity and selfishness, and later some genuinely bleak troubles. Our main characters here are Carl and Yaya, a model and an influencer, played by Harris Dickinson and Shelby Dean, but there is a large cast at play here, including Woody Harrelson as the captain. We have seen this lengthy satirical film. Alastair, what did you think of it?
So, Ruben Östlund's not the most accessible of directors. His films, I don't know, they're a bit arty, is probably the way to put it. There's a lot of slow pacing, long scenes, heavy dialogue. And I did like this a lot. I like the humour of it and things like that. There's sort of quite a lot of awkwardness into it. He kind of has a real sort of knack for nailing what is like just a really awkward moment, or like just moments of people just really struggling to connect or communicate effectively. This film, I thought, really connected itself into a sort of overall narrative that had something more to say. I mean, I really liked his previous film, The Square, which possibly was like even more awkward, but it felt more like a series of disconnected scenes, or sort of loosely connected scenes that were sort of illuminating something broader, whereas this felt it had a sort of consistent narrative and direction to it. So overall, I don't know if I'd say enjoyable, but certainly an entertaining experience.
Yeah, no, I liked watching this. It was a good film. It was enjoyably off-kilter always. It never quite went in the direction you might expect it to the extent that you could predict what might happen, because it becomes pretty clear pretty early on, but it's probably not going to go that way. It's the sort of film that regular listeners probably expect me to say could have been shorter, at 2.5 hours long. But even though that is quite long for a nominal comedy, I think it's divided into 3 distinct parts, the last of which we may have to dance around spoiling, I don't know. What ends up happening in the third part is quite a good sort of punchline transition, so I feel vaguely bad spoiling it. We might try and avoid that, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the 3 distinct part structure does mean it gets away with the quite long runtime. And yeah, it's this sort of comedy of awkwardness and cynicism. It's interesting because even though it's a satire, for the most part, the rich people aren't complete and utter, like, cartoon monsters. No one here is, going ham and chewing on the scenery. But they're just sort of quietly, obviously awful. There's just a sort of sneering unpleasantness to the way they talk to most people, even each other.
Yeah, I mean, they're not violent or anything like that, or there's not like a character who's sort of like, I don't know, an oil executive who's going, haha, I am now, I've just destroyed the environment of the rare, gilded parrot or whatever. It's like, there's a lot of like unpleasant people, and it goes out of the way not to make them cartoon baddies, but at the same time, the rich people come across as really obnoxious and unpleasant to varying degrees. It's sort of strange that we kind of see the film through Carl and Yaya, who are the closest thing we have to every people, or the person in the street view, even though they're both models. Yaya's an influencer, so they are pretty elite, but to be honest, they're sort of outsiders in this world of oligarchs and billionaires.
I don't know, I feel like it's kind of, with Carl and Yaya, it's kind of the classic method of giving us main characters who seem at first like they might be vaguely likeable, but then sort of revealing that they're actually kind of just as bad, because especially in Carl's case, not only do they suck, but they also, because they're vaguely aware of, how much everyone else sucks, or because they know a few social justice buzzwords, they think they're somehow morally superior to everyone, despite the fact they still suck.
Yeah, and there's this element of us seeing through their perspective, but also I think the film is not above criticising them as well. I mean, the film has a strong political point. It's about a lot of obnoxious rich people on a boat. It's not subtle in that regard, but as well as going for the wealthy, it's also, I think, going for the people who are the sort of the stool pigeons of the wealthy, the influencers who are selling this lifestyle, and kind of perpetuating the inequalities of the uber rich by making it look so glamorous and nice. So, I think just because they're the kind of lens we see the film through doesn't mean they're not also being skewered by it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is sort of death by a thousand cuts of it. Just at first everyone seems that they might be alright, and they just make more and more awful demands, and to the extent that you just can't defend them anymore. But I haven't really watched that much like full-on Peep Show style cringe comedy since possibly when Peep Show ended, and although it doesn't get quite as cover my eyes unwatchable as Peep Show did at times, it's definitely in that class, I think, especially during like every interaction the rich people have with a member of staff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very much Ruben Östlund's sort of sense of humour. He does cringe, he does awkwardness. I mean, The Square has one scene in the middle of it that is Peep Show level, unwatchably so cringe, and it's quite upsetting. And I guess one of my main criticisms of Triangle of Sadness is it never quite achieves that level. But there is one certainly quite unpleasant set piece awkward cringe comedy moment involving a spoiled banquet and a lot of vomiting. Which,
there's a
which is definitely one of the high points or low points of the film, depending on your view.
It is definitely kind of the climactic set piece in some way. I guess it's sort of the climactic set piece of part 2 of the film, which is about half an hour instead of about 1.5 hours in. It's the sort of middle hour. And yeah, that definitely climaxes with this horrible, horrible captain's dinner sequence. Which, I'll give it this, it is the most I felt like I was on a boat since whenever I was last on a boat. It really prepares us nicely for the inevitable bodily fluid smorgasbord by just floating the camera around and rubbing it gently back and forth and really pushing in and out of the actors and showing them sort of swaying. It's really fucking sickening in some ways. I myself did not vomit, but I could see how they might.
It's absolutely grotesque. Yeah, when the film was at the London Film Festival, they had a whole page advert for this film in the festival, just for pictures of someone spewing, and it was so disgusting I had to cut it out because I couldn't look at it every time I opened the guide. It is, really quite disgusting. And it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, it truly never ends. Yeah, in some ways that is the big high point of the film, a point of ridiculous, comic, ludicrous disgustingness. It never quite tops after that. But fair play, it is a big one.
Yeah, that's one of its climactic moments. And I think, although it doesn't quite reach the level of Nathan Barley, the most cringe episodes of Peep Show, or the banquet scene in the square involving the ape performance. But I feel that what improved this film is that it did feel like it had like a plot to it, rather than being a sort of, a much more arty series of interconnected scenes illuminating character and setting and politics, which there's a place for those films, and like I say, Roland Austin's previous film is one of them, but this one benefited from it has a sort of narrative arc. I mean, I feel it's okay to spoil things that are in the trailer. There's Yaya and Carl's life pre-cruise. There's the cruise, which although it's Act 2, it's probably the longest chunk of the film, and then Act 3 is after a shipwreck. That gives it a sort of arc and structure, which I feel the film and narrative progression, which I feel the film benefited from.
It does. I think possibly it doesn't quite have the sense of ascent or building either tension or comedy that I wanted it to have. Like, logically, the shipwreck stuff, where the rich people have to try and survive without their precious creature comforts, it is a logical extension of what he's been doing, and you think it should feel like the glorious climax of the whole thing, but in practice it actually feels like it's all sort of a gear down from the heights of the cruise sequence, where they were all even more stuck in traps together. And I felt like I wanted it to somehow ascend to a glorious climax in the shipwreck sequence, which possibly even exceeded the ridiculousness of the cruise sequence, which, although it did a strong job, I don't think it quite managed, which may be the one bit that the film slightly drops for me.
Yeah, the sort of message comes through more at the end. There's I don't want to say too much because it's worth obviously watching the film and experiencing it, but there's various things about how all the super rich people are absolutely useless and have no relevant skills at all when it comes to the meat and potatoes of surviving.
Shockingly enough.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they are the most useless people, and now they have to survive on an island after a shipwreck. They can't even light a fire. Most of the work is done by a Filipino woman who was a cleaner on the ship. Obviously, there's lots of political satire in here. It's making, again, it's wearing, its politics on its sleeve. It's not difficult to do a Marxist reading of this film. There's class hierarchy. There are, people who work and people who own, proletariat, bourgeoisie. There's a revolution in the sense of their system is overthrown by a shipwreck. It's got easy to do political readings in this, but the ending really does kind of bring all the political stuff together in the final act. But it doesn't quite really attain the level of dark comedy that the second act did.
Yeah, I just felt like I maybe wanted a bit more of a big comic set piece to finish it off. By 2 hours in, he has made his point that rich people suck, and I'm not sure the climactic, 30-45 minutes, has much more to say than they sure do suck.
Yeah, I guess it just sort of illuminates it in different ways.
Yeah, and it does do interesting things to bring the characters' stories to a conclusion, and their sort of arcs do keep progressing, which is why it's still a good watchable film and why this isn't actually a bad review. But to obtain classic status or to challenge Banshees of Inisherin, which, to be honest, I laughed at more. Well, I don't know. Banshees of Inisherin, that's not really a fair comparison. I think Banshees of Inisherin is possibly trying more for a certain sort of laugh-out-loud one-liner line of comedy, whereas this, I don't think is doing that.
Yeah, it's a different type of comedy. I mean, this is obviously more of an awkward comedy, but also I think it's more of a... rather than being like funny lines, it's more the sort of these absurd situations you find yourself in, yeah. or the characters find themselves in.
But yeah, as I say, it's still good. It's got something to say, and it's got a very interesting, random, rambling plot progression, which does keep you on your toes.
Yeah, I feel that, that helped it for a director who can be artier. I don't know of a better way to put it. That sort of structure really did help. I also did appreciate, again, New Noised by Refused on the soundtrack. That was a small point, but that was also, fresh from its use in The Bear. It's in this as well. And another small thing I spotted, which is the British arms dealers couple are called Winston and Clementine, which was Churchill and his wife's name, so that's deliberate. So,
Okay.
that's the trivia corner over with, but there we go.
Possibly two of the characters who were kind of quite basic monsters, but fair enough, you only get about 3 scenes.
Yeah, I mean, they were, more of a sort of, just unpleasant rich people. But yeah, I mean, the film's got a point to make, and it makes it well.
Oh, yeah.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe or leave a review to help others find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want even shorter written pieces by us, you can go to MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, where we will occasionally post our emissions. Even more of which can be found on my Twitter at NickMB or my website at nickbryan.com.
You can follow me on Twitter, should you want to, at Alastair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us for the next episode of the podcast for a superhero double bill, when we'll be delving into quantum physics in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and then we'll be searching for our superpowers in Extraordinary. Join us in 2 weeks to find out what we made of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.